So, and now I think we directly go over to the next presentation of Salvatore. I think I'm just gonna sit here for one more minute, and then Salvatore can come on stage. So, the second artist of our exhibition is Salvatore Vitale, and he's born in 1986 in Italy, but moved to Switzerland when he was 18 years old, and now lives in Zurich. He is a interdisciplinary artist doing photography and also research-based art. He focuses on the development and complexity of modern societies and investigates power structures, politics, and technologies. In doing so, he not only combines visual tragedies, but also unites scientific analysis, fiction, and storytelling. And I think this is also the case with the project we're exhibiting. It's called How to Secure a Country, and for this long-term project, he researched the mechanisms Switzerland uses to seal itself off from the rest of the world, and thus its strong need for security. The project was also part of the Foam Talent exhibition program in 2019, and it was exhibited in Winterthur and is also published as a book and is now in our exhibition, Us and Then. And we decided to show the series there because it wonderfully visualizes how that separation is not just a common practice in authoritarian states, but also in democracies. So, Salvatore, come to the stage, and I will join you in a minute.
Hello, thank you for being here. So, unfortunately, I'm going to sit because my laptop is here, although I would like to, I gesticulate because I'm Italian, of course. But I'll try to do both at the same time. So, let me start my presentation. Okay, so I think it's important maybe to tell a little bit who I am, because I think that this reflects very much my practice. And you can also understand better maybe my approach to, for instance, how to secure a country and all the projects I'm working on, or I've been working on in the past years. Well, of course, I mean, I define myself as a visual artist, photographer. Of course, photography is still let's say, one of the main media I use, but I don't really have a training in photography, and I come from a research background, and this is something that I developed over the years, also in my artistic practice. I think that for me it was always very important to mix different interests I have, also because I think that I'm a very curious person and I can't be really focused on one thing at the moment. And this led me to really explore several possibilities, especially in relation to image making and visual storytelling. So, if on a side, of course, I have my artistic practice, I work mostly on long-term projects, visual researchers, as I like to call them. I'm also a publisher. I've been publishing a magazine for 10 years, Yet Magazine, and it is something that really, I can say, influences the way I develop my understanding of photography and also my active somehow role sitting on the other side of the table. But also I teach, and teaching, I see teaching as a part of my artistic practice as well. So it's not just a side job I do to earn some money, but it's really something where I really develop also together with the students my research and collaborative practices. You will see I'm very much in this idea of collaboration. I really love to collaborate to realize my project. And then, of course, I'm pretty active also, especially recently, the last maybe 4 to 5 years. I'm exploring also possibilities about, for instance, all that can be in relation to digital publishing or the connection between digital and physical spaces. This before COVID even, but then of course, I mean, the last couple of years, it exploded, as we all know. So, as you can see, I mean, I'm pretty chameleontic in the sense, and at the same time, this I think is reflected very much in my work, in my pure artistic work. And how to secure a country is a kind of an example of it, you will see. I mean, I was talking about publishing, so this is Yet Magazine. Of course, Yet Magazine is something that I do, also in a way, I see it as a personal project. So we started with Nicolas Polli when we were very young, actually. Also in a very naive way. We really didn't know what would really imply to publish a magazine at the time, especially budget-wise, but we did it, and we managed. It was hard, but we managed, and then, yeah, now it's the 10th year that we are active. And I say that I see it as a personal project because it really started as a personal project, and at the same time, for me, it's a way to really engage with what contemporary photography is, and also what kind of possible development can come. I'm looking very much at the future, but of course I'm interested in understanding the past, so it's kind of historicism in order to really understand what kind of possible futures might be, both for the medium but also in comparison to my research practice. I'm a publisher also in the sense I also work with other publication. I recently edited this book that really gives you like this example of how I try to look at the possibilities towards the media. This was published. It came out earlier this year, and it's a book that I edit for Future Photography, which is this European platform based in Amsterdam for talent development. And the whole book was about really trying to understand possible futures for the medium, especially after all this shaking brought by COVID and the pandemic times. But that was just a starting point. Then it was very much, I mean, as we all know, photography is a medium in transition, and I think it's like pretty evident at the moment. And so for me, my research is very much about understanding where this can lead us in 10, 20, 30, 50 years. So for me, it's very interesting also to get to know and collaborate with people that are kind of addressing similar research questions, and also in some cases being very provocative. I love provocations, but at the same time, I think that it's also very interesting for me, this idea of transmediality, and so also, what does it mean photography nowadays? I mean, it's just like a medium where like it's the photo per se, or where this kind of crossover or like transversal idea of mixing different medium is bringing us, and what this can add to photography, both in terms of production but also distribution, especially in a moment in the networked image era, let's call it like this. I mean, in this contest, I also curated online exhibition, etc. And so it's pretty broad, the scope of activities that I cover, but this is what I really enjoy doing. And this is also what is kind of defining more and more my practice over the years. I like to say that I'm attracted by what is elusive and abstract. I think that it's very interesting, for instance, to look at abstraction, especially in the third modernity or in the society we are living in, where basically we need like capitalism needs abstraction in order to exist, but what this abstraction means and what kind of society is creating. And as something that is abstract is hardly graspable at the same time. And so for me, I like this idea of elusiveness. So when I, for instance, investigate on a power structure, on a specific government or technological, whatever kind of consequence, I mean, it's all very highly abstract. We really can't grasp what does it mean. It's outside our pure understanding in some cases. And so for me, it's like, I really like to explore the functioning of those systems and then unveil them somehow, but never like being so much judgmental. For me, it's very much about collaborating somehow with my audience in order to together make sense of what we see and what we understand of it. And so my project somehow requires a little bit of engagement in the sense, And the way I photograph also requires a little bit of deployment. So we can say that, yes, I'm still like in the scope of documentary or documentation, but I really like to work within this idea of expanded documentary somehow, let's call it like this, although I'm not a fan of the word expanded. But yeah, this idea of mixing type of narratives, fiction, speculative, documentary, and like to try to bring like this sort of enhancing a little bit the way that the storytelling behind my work. So, How to Secure a Country, which is the project that is shown at the Deutsche Börse Photography Foundation, is a project that actually started from very personal reason, and then it grew and exploded. Like in many cases, I always start from very small ideas, and then they blow up like and take years for me to really be happy for or to be ready to show something. So actually, it started for political reasons. So the project, I mean, although, as I said, I'm not very judgmental, the project is political, and it's stupid to hide it. It started from in 2014, so it's already like a while ago, when basically in Switzerland we had this votation against massive immigration. Switzerland is a very interesting case study. I don't know how much you know about politics in Switzerland. I mean, of course, I'm not going to go very deep now because otherwise it takes some time. But Switzerland is a direct democracy, so it means that people really have a lot of power, decisional power. So we have tons of referendum and this kind of votation that we call popular initiative, because they really come from the bottom. Then they really affect the constitutions. So there was this popular initiative that was mostly, of course, promoted by right-wing and extreme right-wing parties. And I like to call it a Brexit before Brexit, because somehow it is. I mean, of course, it didn't have like this huge, let's say, impact in the news like Brexit. But I think that in Germany they were writing a lot about it as well. And unfortunately, of course, it passed. That would mean that they were trying to basically, or they managed to change a little bit the regulation about immigration in the country, and at the same time, like the quotas. Of course, Switzerland is also a country where, at least at that time, 39% of the population is foreigner. So like me, I'm not Swiss, not yet. And I mean, you can imagine the effect of this. So I was also myself very much affected, because at that time I was already 10 years in the country. And for me, it was always like, oh my God, I thought I was pretty much integrated, but actually I'm still a guest. And I don't know, I mean, at some point I was even thinking about leaving the country, because I don't really want to be in a place where I'm not fully accepted somehow, although. But well, I mean, after a first moment of I was very mad, let's say. After the first moment, I was like, okay, but I really want to understand why, at that time in 2014, there's still this stupid type of conversation, or why we need to really always address this idea of an enemy or whatever it is. So I didn't have in mind to do a project about it, like zero at all. For me, it was more like, was really personal reasons. So I started to study and research Swiss history, cultural development, in order to try to find the reasons. And it was interesting because, I mean, I was reading a lot, I was talking with people, I was talking even with my friends in order to understand, because I even found out that many of my friends voted in favor. It was like, what are you doing? What the fuck are you doing? So for me, it was very much like, okay, well, and it was interesting that was always this keyword, security. Everything was like justified by security, needs for security. So something triggered into my mind, and then I really decided to really start to explore this idea. Also at the time, if you will remember, it was a moment in which like there were like all the populist kind of discourses arising in Europe, in many countries. Hungary, for instance, is an example. But also Italy with the migration crisis. It was like the highest pitch of the migration crisis. Switzerland also was very affected by it because of the Balkan route. So, I mean, it was like, you could really sense that there was like this big issue that was about to explode. And so, at some point I started to think, well, I live in the so-called safest country in the world, so that's a great case study. That's a great example to address a global tendency or a global trend. So the project, to me, has never been really about Switzerland, in a sense. But Switzerland, as a scholar, let's say, as a researcher, I just use Switzerland to explain a global trend. And I was lucky enough to live in a country that is the perfect case study for this. So there was a mix of things happening that were kind of helping me to really address this. These are some research questions I was starting from, but of course I developed so many, because you need to understand that also what does it mean a security system is such an abstract concept. And it's also something that is very, 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 let's say, complex, highly complex. So I had no idea. I mean, my idea was like very naive at the time, like, yeah, security is police, the army, the way they collaborate somehow, but actually there is so much more. Of course, I mean, in the pretty recent time, there is also this idea of technologies affecting a lot of security. And so, of course, I mean, the scope really became very complex. It's not anymore about protecting a physical infrastructure or a territory or a border, but it means like so much more. And so to me at the beginning it was very much about, I need to understand it, otherwise I can't really do anything. So here there is some people have been working it. I told you that I really like to work in a collaborative way. And I think it's important to mention some people that helped me. So for instance, Jonas Hagman was like amazing, and I had just a meeting with him because at that time he was a researcher at the Center for Security Studies at the University of Zurich, where I basically started pretty early a collaboration with. And he was the guy who really explained me the complexity of the Swiss security system. And so by understanding that and studying that, I could understand also what to show in my project, because you can imagine it could take forever. It's so complex that the government in Switzerland is assigning centers like the Center for Security Studies research in order to understand what are the collaboration, for instance, between actors that produce security in the country. So it's pretty complex. And I couldn't cover everything, so I really had to focus on, okay, what I show, how I show it, etc., etc. Then I had other people like Roland Blaker, who is an expert in visual politics. I was lucky enough because he's from Zurich. I mean, he's based in Brisbane, in Australia, but he's originally from Zurich, so we could even meet because he came. Once a year he visits Zurich. Philippe Di Salvo is also a researcher and expert and journalist, expert of cryptography and cybersecurity. And then, of course, there were like people more in the art world, like Lars Willumait, who is an amazing curator now at the Musée de l'Élysée in Lausanne, but he's also a social anthropologist. So for me, it was like, it's not just you curate my work, but you really bring content into the project. So we developed the exhibition that there was in Winterthur, and the prints that you can see at the Deutsche Börse Foundation belongs to that exhibition. So they're traveling from Winterthur. And Offshore Studio also, they are an amazing design studio, specialized also in data visualization and research type of design. And again, they did my book, we developed the data visualization for my project, but also they were bringing content. It wasn't just like giving them an assignment, you do it. So I really like to create kind of research teams around me and work together in order to develop it. These are like a list of institutions I've been collaborating with for the project, so you can really understand like how many in the end, and also access, how hard it was to access the system. But let me show you some pictures finally. So I was talking about access. At the beginning it was very hard. It took more than 1 year for me to really manage to access the first institution, for instance. Because of course you can imagine like, I'm a non-Swiss, first of all, a photographer, whatever, and you send an email like, oh yeah, I'm doing a project on security. Can you please host me? I want to photograph what you do. Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. So I mean, as often in life it happens, it was just by chance that I got the first access. First of all, I mean, I was never saying that I'm a photographer. That's the rule, the basic rule. Artist works better because then it's like a little bit more abstract in a way. But then it happened that basically Jonas Hagman that I showed you beforehand, he had a former classmate, I think at the secondary school or whatever, that became the chief of the border guards in Basel. And then, I mean, through this connection suddenly I had open access to the border guards. And so, I mean, from there, then, of course, you start to develop trust around you. Trust is a very important concept when you speak about security. So I started to develop trust around me, and then it was a little bit easier to access. But, of course, I didn't have access to every institution that I wanted to visit for several type of reasons. But at the beginning, I was also like while I was waiting to get access, I was also trying to explore the social impact of security somehow, also without the need to necessarily working with an institution. So for instance, what you see here is like the reenactment of the instructions of the Swiss assault rifle, which is very similar to an AK-47. But in Switzerland, it's very common. You go on the train and there are people with this all the time, because in Switzerland, of course, the military is still mandatory, and soldiers or people, I would say, they are really allowed to bring their guns at home, and that makes us Switzerland one of the most armored countries in the world as well. It's very common to have a gun. It's very common to fire a gun, to go to the shooting range with your family, because also shooting became a national sport in the meantime. And it's very interesting to understand socially Switzerland, because it's like this country that is very open, or apparently is very open-minded, but still there is this pro-military culture that comes from years of cultural development. And if you look back at Swiss history, you really understand why. It's like, I was saying yesterday, I think that it's like an island. So it's in the center of Europe, small country, wealthy country, there is something to protect. And then, of course, this favored this development of a culture that is kind of, in a way, closed, or like they have something to protect somehow. And there are plenty of examples. So the militarization of the landscape, for instance, that I kind of, is a part of the project that came after the Second World War, because there was always this idea of a threat, like something from the outside wanting to come and kind of attack. And so, I mean, this leads to all the both visible and invisible strategies of security. And this also, in Switzerland, there is also, as you might know, a very good insurance system. And also, I mean, this idea of prediction, simulation, these simulations is very important. Because, I mean, it's very much about trying to control the uncertainty. And that's like very much in the Swiss culture. And so this leads to so many things that I've been treating the project. I will go quickly with the images. I think that also my images is not very much about what it is, a single image. I'm never focusing on that. As you see, my visuality is pretty, let's say, clinical or cynical. I never really show action or what's going on. For me, images really work to create a sense of atmosphere, let's say, and that support then all the conceptual side of the work. So in that sense, it was interesting. There was the director of the museum, the Masi in Lugano, that was introducing my work some weeks ago, and it was inserting my work in this tradition of conceptual documentary. And I find it interesting, like this idea of what is conceptual documentary? So we can find all this kind of definition. But in that sense, I think it works pretty well, because it's like, I'm never going to show you, like, you have to imagine while I was shooting all these images, or at least many of those images, I was like, this one is a good example that is also shown here. Here, I was like surrounded by policemen, other 3 or 4 dogs. I was like in a small apartment, lots of noise, because they were looking for drugs. But then, I mean, this is the final image. I really like to create this sense of tension in a way. which doesn't reflect then maybe the pure documentation of it. So I'm not documenting the dog finding the drug or all the policemen like busy or the person that then got arrested, for instance. I don't care about that. For me, it's very much like I want to bring you into a mindset, let's say, or into a mental space where you can really feel the tension, but then it's you who makes like sense of what you see, connecting the dots. So the images, the data I'm presenting, etc., etc. Hmm? Yeah, they found drug. I can tell you also where. It was hidden, basically. On the top left corner, you see like there is this, the kitchen, how do you call it, that aspires, was like hidden there. So they found it. But yeah, it was like very interesting. And then I am obsessed by this idea of control rooms. I really love them aesthetically also. So I've been photography, maybe hundreds of control rooms. I really love this idea that you know that there are like important decisions are taking or like strategies are made. But I mean, a control room is a very boring room with screens. It's nothing like crazy. But I think that all this kind of visuality kind of creates a sense of it. And then, I mean, I've been developing the project following this path. Also here, for instance, the portrait, I mean, I never have people in my work, very few. But always you never see them in the face, for instance. But this one, I mean, it was really a situation because Switzerland security is also made like there is a big debate about private security because the government is really giving a lot to private security companies. And so, I mean, the use of data, the control, there were big scandals as well. And yeah, I mean, this is a private security guard that was like working, but I kind of, it's not staged, let's say. But I always find a way to really like create this tension rather than, I'm going a little bit faster because I think that we're running out of time. But the project is very made of, I mean, in the end, the final edit in the book, because like, I think that is almost 200 images. Also because I work with archives as well. I will show you some, and I intervene on them. And I've been visiting several places. But of course, I mean, the work is very made of several layers. So what you see, it's, for instance, in this case, is like a simulation of a terrorist attack in the border. So it's all staged. But at the same time, being there, Swiss people take simulations very seriously. And so being there for me was like at some point very dystopian. I was like, at some point you lose the sense of reality. And then it's like, okay, is it really happening? What is going on? And I think, I mean, all this type of ceremony, protocols, instruction, in the end, slowly became central in my work. So if you ask me in a sentence, what is about How to Secure a Country, it's very much about this idea of creating a structure, so creating these protocols that somehow tends or try to control the uncertainty or what is abstract. So giving a sort of, let's say, concreteness to something that is highly abstract. And this is why the security system in Switzerland is so efficient in the end. Because, I mean, there is a protocol for everything. It's like a chain. Everyone knows what happened next. Everyone knows. For instance, the protocol for the pandemic, I went to read, after the pandemic, I went to read what their kind of simulation of a pandemic that was released 10 years ago. It was crazy how they went so close to what happened in reality. And then it was for me interesting to understand and to see when they were making like the press conferences, etc., their strategy that was very much following this protocol. And so, I mean, they always try to, and this look for the future somehow reflects also my way of work, what I was telling you at the very beginning. Then, of course, I think that, as I said, I'm not judgmental in a way, but I think that if you really explore and deep into the work, you can understand what is my point of view. But I'm not interested in really giving you my open point of view. I'm not an activist. I'm not a journalist. That's not my job. I really like to engage in this process of mediation with my audience. Then, of course, and then I slowly will conclude, there is technology. Techno-solutionism is pretty big in security discourses nowadays. And so, I mean, this was also the part that for me was kind of new, or that I really had to figure out. So I've been starting to visit the data center. I was visiting all this company producing IT security, bunkers. In Switzerland, we have a lot of bunkers. The mountains are like, I like to say, they are like Swiss cheese, full of tunnels and holes. And what is going on right now is that a lot of this military infrastructure is not used anymore. But Swiss are very good in creating business. So basically what happened is that they are transforming, they are selling all this infrastructure to private companies. So for instance, they're installing data centers. So in many of these former military bunkers, now you have data centers in Switzerland. And more than 20% of the data traffic in Europe is passing from Switzerland. So this creates, of course, a huge business. And after the end of the bank secrecy, now they managed to find a way to bring money back in the country. The new gold, data, basically. But I mean, I think it's very interesting also because, I mean, there is always this mix visually of old-fashioned. I mean, you see like this is a chalet that is like a fake chalet, actually it's a bunker. Because, I mean, during the Swiss National Redoubt, it's like Swiss mountains are full of hidden bunkers, hidden weapons, all this kind of things, camouflage, etc., etc. And now, I mean, you have like this mix in between like old-fashioned, because I mean also the military infrastructure is from the 80s, 90s in many cases, and then this like super modern data centers with like all the supercomputers and lightings and stuff. So this is an example of a supercomputer. This creates this very interesting clash also between old-fashioned way to do security and modern or more contemporary way to do security. It's also the shift. It really reflects the world we live in or we are building up slowly. Yeah, there are many images. There is also the weather forecast that plays a role in security, a big role actually in security discourses, because of course they provide all the data to make like this sort of also projections and simulations. Robotics, Switzerland is a leading country in development of machines that then are used, especially after Fukushima. The research really shifts for seek and rescue and security missions. And so it's very interesting also this clash and the debates that come out of it of research, especially high-tech research, robotics, and the army. So for instance, if you look at this image, for instance, here, the one, they are training robots in military training camps. So there is always this clash. And it's also very interesting, but at the same time there are debates about the fact that officially research institutes like universities, they can take part or they can collaborate with army or military institutions, especially from abroad. But in order to develop this kind of researches, for instance, the University of Zurich or the University of Lausanne, they are big technical schools. They take part to DARPA contexts that are promoted or organized by the US Army. So I mean, all of this is very subtle, but it really creates a very interesting debate in the country. And the Swiss way to develop this, which might be seen as a positive thing, but I mean, it's complex discourse maybe to do here. The idea is that they are trying to become a little bit more open. So they're trying to bring people to these discussions. And so I'm curious to see where this is going to lead in a few years. But yeah, I think that I'm out of time. I want to leave you with this beautiful image of a robot in a bunker. Pretty dystopian cyberpunk. And then, I mean, there will be time, maybe, if you explore the project further, it's made of several layers. So data visualizations, I'm going very fast, sorry. Archives, because also I'm interested in impression management. So my images show the Swiss system, but I also wanted to understand how a system that needs to stay abstract shows itself. And so there's this double layer, basically. Thank you very much. And maybe while we discuss, I can play a little video.
So thank you very much, Salvatore. Maybe there's already a question out of the audience. There's a...
Well, I'd like to know, of course, what is your feeling about living in Switzerland after having done this research program? How has it changed? Your attitude towards the country, but also to your personal feeling of security.
Well, that's a very interesting question because I have like 7 different type of feelings. I mean, indeed, to me, now at least I understand better. And so this kind of helps me also to accept things that sometimes are not very easy to be accepted in a way. And understanding gives you also power to some extent to also be able to react or counter-react to something that you don't like. So for me, that was like important in a way also for my very personal mental health in a way. No, but yeah, I really understand. On the other side, of course, I mean, Switzerland is a very obscure country, I would say, because I mean, what you know abroad is very different than what really happens in the country. And so if you live there, I mean, now I have enough experience to really kind of grasp something that is very subtle. And my perception of it became like a little bit, more clear. Although there are many things that I still don't really understand. On the other side, security is something that is evolving very much. Like, for instance, if you think about pre- and post-pandemic, it already changed already. I mean, we always have this idea of security based on system of control, so there is some of who controls and some of who is controlled. Actually, the relationship is much more fluid than that. There are things like liminality, so people that at the same time are controller and get controlled. So, and especially technology is bringing a lot of very fast changes. So if you think about all the automated decision systems, for instance, that really affect our everyday life, whatever kind of thing you do. So my perception of security kind of changed in the sense that I maybe thought it was more like old-fashioned, and I really understood that it's not that old-fashioned anymore at all. But it's really becoming, it's really present. Even if you want to ignore it, it's impossible to ignore it. And this is not only Switzerland, of course, but this applies to every single country in the world, I guess, with different type of strategies, different type of effects and causes, but still is becoming very central. It is already very central. And yeah, I think that a research like this will last forever. I mean, it's never over, and I'm just exploring it in different ways.
So another question? Yeah, Selina. Oh, we need a micro.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the idea of trust. I mean, we saw from the last presentation, also from Mate, how important trust is when you're working on a project. I think your images are very cryptic, but when you were working with some of these, the security agencies, did you have to show them all your photographs? And how was the process?
Well, the process was different depending on the institution. So sometimes I had to show my images. I got also some images that were censored that I can't show, or some images where I had to. I don't know if you noticed there was an image with some screens and there was like a censorship applied on the screens. It was a request by the border guard because they told me, but then maybe someone can see what section of the border we are monitoring or stuff like that. Sometimes, reasons are understandable. Sometimes to me they're like a little bit over, they're pumped, I don't know. But at the same time, trust is essential. But security is based on trust in both ways. So if you trust someone, for instance, if you trust a government, then you allow this government to take decision for yourself. And so maybe you will allow the government to buy airplanes for war, even though you'd never go to war. But this is very much based on, I mean, it's not me who says it, but yeah, Anna Arendt wrote a lot about that, for instance. And at the same time, it's important to have trust around you, because if you are trustworthy, then of course you're allowed to access. And for me, creating trust, I mean, I was always very honest and transparent in my intentions. This is why maybe I managed also to kind of gain this much access, because I was like always telling them what I was interested in. I always was showing everything. I always told them from the very beginning, listen, this is going to be a book. So they knew that at some point a book will come. Of course, there are problems. There were some problems. So, for instance, I don't know, a review that says something a little bit problematic about the project, and then I got contacted by the police, and they were like, "Oh, but here someone wrote this. What is that?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, I can't. First of all, I can't control what others write about it. Second, this journalist unfortunately made several mistakes, and so I mean, this I can't control. But on the other hand, I think that." At the beginning, I knew if I use this approach, so if I want to be an insider, because that was really my motivation. I don't want to do an investigation, an investigative project about something, power, whatever. It was like, I'm interested in the system, I'm interested in these protocols, I really need to show them, so I need to access. I need to be part of the system somehow. And I knew that adopting this strategy, I had to get rid of a lot of freedom. This for sure. But to me, it was a fair price to pay to follow my intuition and to do it from this point of view.
Thanks.
Sorry. I found very interesting what you said about predictability. And in terms of your own work, I was wondering if you still get surprised when you go there finally, because you do so much research in advance, and I think you have a certain image in your mind already. And when you go there on site, what happens really with your intuition? And are there things you wouldn't predict?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really predict everything, especially in this case. In this case, I had very little control, in the sense that usually the process was working like this. I was finally gaining access, so receiving this phone call or email where they're saying, you can come. But then often I had to wait maybe months before I could go. And I was like, okay, you have 2 hours. In many cases, I wouldn't even know where they would bring me or what would they show me. And I couldn't even travel. I couldn't bring an assistant. I couldn't bring lighting equipment. So in many cases, like if it was noon with the not very good lighting, then I had to shoot at noon with not very good lighting. So in what you see here is very much like my process of adaptation to the situations. So in many cases, I really couldn't plan or predict anything. I could predict it conceptually, so the research part for sure, but visually not so much. And it was interesting because one of my main concerns at the very beginning was like, I knew that it would last many years. And I was like, okay, but I was afraid, like, what is my visual strategy here? Because I was afraid that in the end, I mean, you shoot a lot, you visit all these places. It's not places where you can go back. So if you don't have the images, you don't have the images. And I was like, how is it going to work in the end when I put everything together? And so I had to really think a lot about the visual strategy, and this is what came out. So this idea of also this very clinical, cynical way of photographing places and situations. So that was my control, somehow, or my attempt to control.
Are there any more questions from the audience? If not, I have a question. I think it's so interesting to see how you work, that you work so scientific in a way. You have like your collaboration team, research team, you work with archives, you have these questions in beforehand. So maybe it's a bit provocative, but why does it matter for you to have images in the end? Anyways, you could have another medium as well.
Because I'm not a writer, I'm not a scientific researcher, so that's my way to present the results of my research. And I'm very attracted, I mean, I love photography, I love images, I love not only photography, I work with video technology, sound. And to me, I think that it's very much about creating an experience. So I really love to work in this, with the idea of creating or suggesting an experience for my audience. And I think that visuality is one of the best ways to do it. The medium itself allows it. And also, I mean, it gives you like a lot of freedom and possibilities and flexibility also in the way you do it. So if I mean, I'm not interested to be a writer for you or to write like, let's say, scientific, although sometimes I do, but...
You are a PhD student as well.
So. But to me it's very much about, expressing this type of concept in a way that also can be interpretative. So the basic is factual, but the result is very open and gives room to interpretation. And this is why also, especially on the recent process I'm working, I really like this idea of the mix between facts and fiction, for instance, and then how do they help to create like this kind of expanded way to narrate a story.
Yeah, I think that's an exciting point. We have all these scientific methods, but in the end you have a very open interpretative result with all the images.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of my, for instance, the data visualization, they went back to academia, so they are being using in programs in universities. For instance, I've been asked, can we use this too? Yes, definitely. So for me, it's important that the basics or what lies behind is factual. So it has like a value, a scientific value in a way. But at the same time, the end result can be completely fictional. I don't care. I mean, I think that's the beauty of it, in a way.
Okay. Thank you very much, Salvatore.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think now we have to
go and visit the show.
Yeah, come and visit the show. I think we have a small break now, and after the break, a 10 minutes break, and after it, Edo Hartmann will present his project, Setting the Stage. Thank you.
Thank you.